Alright, so I got done watching the new Evil Dead, and this was a tricky one because I didn't really have any preconceived opinion going into this one. I mean, I've seen the first three Evil Dead movies, and I really like them. I didn't think the series called for a remake. I mean, by their very nature, the Evil Dead movies have always been kind of cartoony. Um, especially two and three. I mean, one was really more of a mix of uh, of comedy and horror. I mean, but the comedy was upped as the series went on, and actually, it was kind of a blessing that the series stopped when it did, um, before things just descended into all-out camp, eh, without any horror whatsoever. In fact, when you watch Army of Darkness, Evil Dead 3, right after watching Evil Dead 1, there's a huge difference. Not really so much in the character of Ash, but in the sense that just in the style of it and how much it's going for horror as opposed to how much it's going for comedy or cheesiness. So I guess you could make the argument that they wanted to take it back to the roots, where that they wanted to make it a serious horror movie, and I somewhat object to that because there have been so many other movies, especially nowadays, that have essentially copied the Evil Dead premise, in the sense that you have this group of people going to an abandoned cabin in the woods, and they're attacked by some paranormal or supernatural entity, whether it be zombies or ghosts or whatever. Actually, the first thing I said when I came out of Cabin in the Woods was, "Wow, that was a decent Evil Dead ripoff." I mean, obviously, it didn't get that. It wasn't really an Evil Dead ripoff, but it was. The premise was similar to Evil Dead up until the end, but I digress. So, as for the remake of the first Evil Dead, it's okay. I mean, it's not as good as any of the other ones in my opinion, but for what we got, and looking at a lot of horror remakes nowadays, I think we should be really thankful. I mean, this could have easily turned into one of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remakes or reboots. I mean, just this year I saw Texas Chainsaw 3D, which was, I think, somewhat of a sequel and somewhat of a reboot. And that movie was garbage. But this one, not so much. There are definitely problems, but I'm not ashamed that I saw it. I mean, like I said, it's decent. It's a perfectly fine gore fest. I mean, that's essentially what it is. It's a gore fest, and it does this really well. Strengths of the movie, the effects. Wow. I mean, the effects for the original Evil Dead movies are still really good for the most part, but some of them don't really hold up. Like, a lot of the blood kind of looks like food coloring nowadays. And if you're kind of more film savvy, you can definitely tell that they're not really in the woods. I mean, they're in a studio. But this one was. It actually looks like woods. I mean, it has this really creepy atmosphere in that. It seems to be always foggy. I mean, it's where the cabin doesn't really look like it's located in woods. It looks like a swamp, more like. I mean, it looks like they're stranded in the Everglades. But not just that. The blood effects and the gore effects and the zombie effects are all fantastic. I mean, just wow. And most, if not all of them, are done practically. I mean, I would be hard pressed to find a CG effect in this movie. I mean, maybe one or two, but for the most part, what you're seeing on screen is really there. And I appreciated that, especially with a lot of the CG horror movies going around nowadays. Did you see the remake / prequel of John Carpenter's Thing? Ugh. But these effects definitely boost the movie, and I know that may sound a little shallow, like a movie is held aloft just by its effects, but for something like this, which is just trying to be a gore fest and just going for shock value, it works. I mean, when you think of the Evil Dead 2, I mean, there's certainly not much to that movie in terms of narrative. I mean, it's not a deep narrative by any means. I mean, Bruce Campbell encounters some zombies, and he meets some other people, and they have to try and stop the zombies using the Necronomicon. But the main draw is seeing Bruce Campbell fight these, for lack of a better term, evil dead. And this is where that movie truly shines. There are several scenes where these zombies get cut up. They emit some form of fluid, whether it be vomit or piss or whatever. But just wow. I mean, these effects are great. They're the best gore effects I've seen in a long, long time. And that's not all that works about the movie. I mean, the acting, while not Oscar worthy, is definitely a slight step above your usual horror cast of these characters are just here to die. I mean, the acting helps it definitely helps make these characters feel like actual characters instead of zombie chow. I mean, especially Jane Levy. I have to give a shout out to Jane Levy, who she really goes over the top, but it works. I mean, she's the best actress in the movie. I mean, I don't know if she watched the original Evil Dead movies, but she steals the show. I mean, she works as both a human and when she changes into a demon. I mean, and again, going back to the effects, this could have easily, as good as the makeup and prosthetics are on the zombies, this could have easily been a case like Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters, where the makeup and prosthetics are doing most of the acting and the actors are just inside it. They don't. But no, this Jane Levy acts through the makeup and prosthetics. She works with it. I mean, and it really pays off. I mean, they don't do the song, which part of me is kind of glad. I mean, they don't do the song where she's singing like "We're gonna get you, time to go to sleep" stuff. You know how partially. I'm glad they didn't do that, partially because of all the other references in the movie. And at first, I was kind of sticking up for this movie in terms of the references, but there are a lot, or not a lot, but a fair amount. I mean, let's see. Okay, about halfway through the movie, one of the girls, the main guy's girlfriend, um, her hand gets infected, and it kind of starts spreading up her arm, and she gets a power saw or a meat cutter, an electrified meat cutter, and saws through her own arm to stop the infection. And I'm kind of thinking, that's kind of like what Ash did in Evil Dead 2 when his hand was trying to kill him. But you know what? Maybe that's not really a nod. Maybe that was unintentional. It was a different location on the arm, so I kind of brushed that off. And then at the end of the movie, Jane Levy is running away from one of the undead people, and she goes in a tool shed and she reaches for a chainsaw. And again, I'm thinking, maybe that too was unintentional. Maybe they're not. They can't be that deliberate. They went through all this trouble to make this serious interpretation of Evil Dead, and they can't be that obvious. But then, sure enough, Jane Levy's hand gets cut off, or not cut off. She yanks it off to get out from underneath the truck, and the zombie is saying, "I will feast on your soul." I think something like that. And Jane Levy attaches the chainsaw to her wrist stub and says, like, "Feast on this," and hacks the zombie in two. And I'm like, oh, come on. I stood up for you. I stood up for this movie and it bit me. What else? The characters are not as memorable. Actually, then again, the characters in the original Evil Dead weren't really that memorable either. They weren't bad characters, but really the one you immediately notice and the one you want to see live is Ash. Here, the one you want to see live is Jane Levy's brother. But even then, the characters, a lot of them, some of them are just there to die. The main character's girlfriend is there to die. The nurse chick is there to die. Everyone else, like, there's just one really long-haired guy with the big glasses who's basically, I guess, the voodoo expert, because he's the one always looking in and researching the Necronomicon, the Book of the Dead. So there's him. There's the main character, David. There's Jane Levy. And there's the dog. That's it. There's not. Actually, the dog dies. So those are the two characters that carry the movie, basically, because Jane Levy turns into one of the undead pretty early on. But yeah, I'm just watching this thinking, Bruce Campbell may have been really cheesy, especially in the later ones, but at least he was memorable. These guys, they're trying, but they just don't have that screen presence. They don't have that. They just have these faces that they're just average looking faces, and maybe that was the idea, but I think for something like Evil Dead, for something as iconic as that, for such a significant horror classic, you need you need a pretty memorable lead, and that's what this movie is lacking. It seems like. Um, and and as a result, when the characters are just talking and trying to come up with a plan, a lot of it is like the original in that they don't repeat dialogue. It's not like Star Trek Into Darkness where they repeat the same dialogue, but it's pretty similar in how it plays out. They're like we got to get out of here. Oh no, the road's blocked. We gotta destroy the book. Oh no, it won't burn. Blah 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 blah. And the thing is, seeing that dialogue delivered by lesser actors causes the movie to drag around the halfway point. And I'm not one who gets bored easily. I mean, I wasn't bored, but I'm just thinking, this really could use a little bit more momentum at this point in the movie. But I guess that's a minor gripe when it comes to something like this. This, like I said before, this is meant to be a gore fest, not really meant to be taken all that seriously. I mean, it's definitely got plenty of over-the-top moments, particularly toward the end. The characters, to their credit, the characters are not written to be stupid. I mean, they make one or two stupid decisions, like they say, why don't we just take her to a doctor, and the chick who's studying to be a nurse is saying, like, I am giving her everything the doctors would give her. So that's moments like that are kind of distracting, but other than that, the characters do respond logically. They do, or as logically as you can, with a situation like this. But this is not an idiot movie. You're not groaning at the stupidity of the characters being demonstrated on screen. I mean, it's not like, I hate to bring up such a topical example, but it's not like Texas Chainsaw 3D, where these characters are complete morons, and you really don't care if they die. Whenever someone dies in this, it's pretty significant. And to these actors' credit, they carry it off relatively well when someone dies. So that's my 2 cents on the Evil Dead remake. Again, not as good as the originals, and I don't really think it has the potential for sequels. And some little part of my mind is still holding out for Evil Dead 4. I mean, if Schwarzenegger can come out later and say, I want to go back to the old Conan franchise after Jason Momoa already took over the role, I think Evil Dead can come back. I mean, who's to say Ash doesn't stay fit well into his 50s or however old Bruce Campbell is? I mean, they even kind of set it up at the end of this. Like, at the end of the credits, the movie does one of those things that I really don't like movies to do nowadays, where at the end of the credits they put a little extra scene, but it's just a little stinger, where Bruce Campbell, who is not in the rest of the movie at all, you see him look at the camera and say, groovy. So that made me smile. I mean, that was the one reference to the original movies that I liked. And ironically, it was the one that was the most self-aware. But yeah, if you want to rent the new Evil Dead, chances are you won't like it as much as the original movies, or maybe you'll like it more than Army of Darkness. But yeah, maybe you'll like it more than Army of Darkness if you don't like the slapstick comedy of Army of Darkness. But as for Evil Dead 1 and 2, they still are the best in the series. But this remake, it tries. and it puts forth a good effort. The effects are really something to be seen, and the acting is fine, and it's, to be honest, it is kind of interesting to see what a, I don't want to say joyless, it's not joyless, but a more quote-unquote serious interpretation of this story, how that turns out. I mean, it was kind of interesting to essentially see the first Evil Dead without the comedy. It's decent, so I would recommend a rental at least. I mean, to any horror fan or any fan of the originals, you won't be pissed off. At least I don't think you will. I mean, if you're looking for this to be equal to the originals, you'll be disappointed. But now I'm repeating myself. This, yeah, rent it. Groovy, I guess.